Afghan President Hamid Karzai is blaming this week's violence in his country on Islamic militants living in the mountains of neighboring Pakistan, the same region where Taliban fighters are believed to be hiding Osama bin Laden. Over the past 2 days, militants have attacked U.S. and Canadian forces and Afghan towns in 2 southern provinces. More than 100 people have been killed, most of them Taliban, but 15 Afghan police, an American civilian, and a Canadian soldier also died. The killings mark the most violence period in Afghanistan since the fall of the Taliban in 2001. So why now? Journalist and CBS News consultant Jerry Van Dyke joins us with some insight. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning, Meg.
We haven't seen this kind of violence in a long time. Why now?
It's remarkable, isn't it? We've had suicide bombing in Ghazni, just outside of an American military base in the south. This tremendous battle that took place further east in Kandahar, just north of Pakistan's Baluchistan province. We had a suicide bomber in Herat today or yesterday, which is right near the Iranian border. All over the country, we had attacks on girls' schools in Badakhshan and in Mazar Sharif, Balkh province in the north. All of a sudden, throughout Afghanistan, it seems that everything is picked up all of a sudden, but it is building, has been building for a long time now.
Well, what does that mean about the Taliban? Are they regrouping?
The Taliban never really went away. What really happened was Americans felt, and a lot of observers felt throughout the world, that the Taliban were defeated very easily. But in fact, what they did was move back into the countryside. They took off their black turbans, went and became farmers, and they observed. They watched the American forces, they watched the Europeans come, NATO, the ISAF troops, and they watched, in particular, the Karzai government, and they saw that he was not able to deliver as much money to the provinces as they thought, and they realized that they still had a chance. And also they had backers outside the country, and so they waited. And it's very important to note, they really haven't changed their allegiances. A leopard doesn't change its spots. This very strong anti-Western, if you will, infidel, anti-Christian or Western belief is still inherent without a doubt throughout the rural part of Afghanistan. 85% of Afghans live in the countryside. It's very easy to go into Afghanistan, they say, but very hard to leave. Ancient tradition.
It seems a lot of this violence has been targeted in the southern provinces. Any significance there?
Right. There are a number of reasons. One, this is Helmand province, Uruzgan province. And Kandahar province. This area in the south is far and away Taliban country. This is Pashtun country. And as Lieutenant General Eikenberry, in charge of coalition forces, American commander in Afghanistan, said just last week, there are a number of things at play. There are tribal feuds, crime, drugs, and there's really no government. There is no state control out there. The Karzai government controls Kabul and some of the outside regions. He has to have tremendous guards when he leaves the country, or when he leaves the capital city. There's really no government structure as we know it there. And what you have is the weather is perfect. Its planting season is finished. It's not too hot. This is a desert region in the south. July and August, it's going to be 100 degrees plus. So now is the time to do it. In the fall and in the spring, late spring, this is the best time to fight. This is why they're doing it.
Well, what can we assume from the people who have done these attacks? Anything that comes out of this?
Well, what is going to happen is, and it's really tragic that they're going after girls' schools in particular. I think this is horrible. They can't really go after U.S. forces that much. They're going against their own people, and what they're trying to do is fight against anything or anyone that's allied with the West. They attacked a UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund vehicle in Herat, of all places. A girls there to help girls. They're going against everything that is seen as against the West. Now, what's really important to note is that some of these people are coming from, I really believe, from Pakistan. Suicide bombings, we've had 20 suicide bombings this year. Never at all took place during the entire 10 years during the anti-Soviet campaign during the 1980s. This is not inherent or indigenous, if you will, to Afghanistan. Also, as General Eikenberry noted, the other form of violence against the West or against their own people now is what? In the form of IEDs. This is a sophisticated way of attacking soldiers, which we've seen throughout Iraq, unfortunately, throughout Baghdad in particular, where you take remote-controlled cell phones and set these things up. The Afghans do not have this technology. They do not have the tradition. They're getting help from the outside.
Well, what does it mean for their struggling democracy at this point?
What you have to understand in some ways is that to them, they've had democracy in the form of their loyal jirga, which means council. It's like a city council or a town council in New England, where tribal chiefs come together. But when you try to import, if you will, as somebody said, you can't import democracy like you import an ice cream making machine, is that this is seen as a Western introduction to Afghanistan, and anything that has anything to do with democracy in their views is seen as a Western import. They're opposed to this. This is a battle against the West to reassert what they feel is the true Islam. This is a tragedy.
And finally, we're supposed to be pulling troops out in July, handing control over to NATO. Is that going to be able to happen at this point? Are we going to see more attacks, or was this just a rare occurrence?
Another thing to note, that one reason why the war is getting worse there and the Taliban are gaining strength is that the United States is not, and I have to repeat, not moving out any soldiers whatsoever. In fact, we're going the other way. There are more soldiers in Afghanistan now than there have been since any time since the U.S. invaded October 2001. We're up to 20,000. The NATO, ISAF, which NATO troops, primarily Christian soldiers from the West, are now going to, by November, will be up to 20,000. That's close to 40,000 soldiers, more than we've had at any time. They see, that is to say, that it's not coming from the Pentagon, and we're not hearing anything from Brussels, but very quietly they are telling us that the war is getting worse and they have to put in more soldiers because the Taliban are on the march. The Taliban know that they are achieving success. More American soldiers are dying per capita in Afghanistan than are dying in Iraq. The war is worse, getting worse.
And we don't have a lot of time, but so we're going to see more attacks.
We are going to see more attacks throughout the summer.
Thank you so much, CBS News consultant Jerry Van Dyke. While Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke works to keep inflation in check, some investors are actually profiting. Are you among them? Joining us with some thoughts on weather in the storm is Ray Hennessy, editor of SmartMoney.com. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning.
Inflation has been rising at its fastest rate in the last 10 years. What's going on?
Well, what's going on is that the economy is strong, and the economy is stronger than a lot of people expected. And when you have a very vibrant economy, the risk always is that prices are going to go up. Now, it's not as bad when we think about inflation. We think about the late 70s, the early 80s, when we also had high unemployment, so people couldn't handle it. The good news about this is that it's coming at a time when we have almost full employment, so we can handle it. But it's definitely something worth watching.
All eyes were on the stock market last week when it took a hit. What can consumers do about that?
Well, first of all, I think there are three things. First of all, you saw a lot of money come out of stocks, but I wouldn't do that. I'd keep money in stocks, particularly in inflationary environments. Stocks tend to outperform even the bond market, so you stay in stocks. But I say stay within the blue chip names, stay within the kind of names that are going to pay dividends, and really the consumer names are great here too, because think about it, inflation is caused by rising prices. So if these companies can pass along those prices to the consumer, it's really not going to affect their earnings, it's not going to affect their stocks, so those are the guys that you want to be a part of. Secondly, consider investing in some of these commodities. I mean, what we're seeing is that the reason that there's inflation is that metals, oil, a lot of the commodity prices are higher. So you can get in on things like that. Now, it's easier nowadays. You don't actually have to buy a barrel of oil. You can buy an ETF or you can buy a mutual fund that invests solely in commodities. So that's what I would consider doing.
But how about gold? We've been hearing about that a lot lately.
Right, great point. I mean, because gold used to be the perfect inflationary hedge. You invested in that because you were afraid of, but gold prices are at multi-decade highs. So there are certain areas like gold and even like oil where you have to make the judgment of whether or not the price is going to continue to go up because, before you invest. Because otherwise you can make the argument that it's overvalued.
And what else can you invest in?
Well, finally, there are these things called Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, or TIPS. And what they are is they're a bond, but the principal of the bond is adjusted to inflation. They're designed for times like this. They're designed for people who want sort of a safe bet. You get about 2.6% yield off them, but also the principal rises in a rising inflation. So if you believe that inflation is going to continue to rise, that's really one of the safest places you can put your money right now. So if you have another part of your fixed income portfolio, you may want to pull them out and put them into TIPS.
And looking ahead to the future, is this something that we're going to see inflation continue to rise? Is this a trend?
Right. I mean, inflation is here to stay, but let's step back for a second and remember, we've had almost no inflation for the longest period of time. It's like interest rates. Interest rates are rising, but we're still not at normal levels yet. Well, inflation's rising. We're still not to the norm. So what we're seeing is a really dramatic move, but a dramatic move not to where it's higher inflation than we can handle, but really inflation of where it's supposed to be. So it's not really in an extraordinary environment right now. We're just getting back to where we used to be. So, I mean, I would get used to it. I would, expect to pay a little more, but there's a lot of things you can do, like we talked about, to really benefit from it.
And we're almost out of time, but a lot of people may think this is a time to lock in their mortgage rates. Is that so?
Right. I mean, this will be affected insofar as the Fed decides to keep getting aggressive and raising rates to keep inflation in check, and Ben Bernanke is really an inflation hawk. Then maybe you want to start thinking about the rates, but there's not that direct correlation between mortgage rates and inflation that there are with other things.
All right. Thank you so much. Ray Hennessy, editor of SmartMoney.com. And if you have questions about personal finance, drop Ray an email. You can write to us on our website at uttm.com.